Hello, everyone. This is our fourth and final episode in our Supporting Multilingual Learners video series, where we're going to focus on student grouping when using ALM strategies. My name is Jenny Aberly, and I'm the Educational Program Specialist with CTL and the ALM Program Director. Joining me today, again, is Molly Shackelford, who's a middle school academic instructional coach. She's a former ML teacher and former district level ML coach, so she brings a lot of expertise around different ways to group multilingual learners when using the ALM strategies. Our objectives for today are to help deepen your understanding about how to better support multilingual students using grouping strategies, and to deepen your understanding of how to intentionally group them paired with some ALM strategies, and how those can be scaffolded together to support our multilingual learners. If you watched episode 1, Molly talked to us about using the Infinite Campus to learn more about our multilingual learners. And so this episode really kind of pairs with that one, because you can use that information to help learn more about grouping your students. If this is your first episode joining us and you don't know anything about ALM, here's a quick introduction. ALM is a Tier 1 whole school approach to literacy around those 5 domains that you see there across the top of the page. If you look at that triangle, you can see the intended goal is to give students opportunities for reading, writing, and speaking and listening, engaged with the vocabulary of the discipline on a very regular basis. And there on the right, you see our conditions for success. Those are really part of our operating system. All of those work together to make the adolescent literacy model more successful. I want to point out that particularly powerful for multilingual learners is the focus on speaking and listening, and vocabulary with their reading and writing. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about our conditions for thinking and learning framework. This is a key component of ALM and really is at the heart of the conditions for success. It's designed to promote active thinking and learning and engagement with the content through those 3 domains you see there on the left: building community, contributing knowledge, and thinking critically, and the practices within each of those domains. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Molly so she can really focus in on grouping our multilingual learners. Thanks, Molly.
Thank you. So with ALM strategies, there's a lot of strategies that call for student collaboration, student pairing, partnering up, working together. And I think sometimes as teachers, if we have a large ML population, or we're teaching a lot of multilingual learners at varying levels of proficiency, we're kind of hesitant to use some of those strategies or try some of those things because we're nervous about their ability, or we don't know how they'll succeed with certain peers. So this is kind of just to encourage us to not be afraid, because intentional student grouping and collaboration is actually a very powerful tool in the classroom, as we know, but particularly for those MLs. So by encouraging peer interaction and collaboration, that's not only providing them opportunities for language use and practice, but then it's also building a community within your classroom. So MLs benefit from observing how their peers learn and solve problems. And so being really intentional about grouping your students and how to group them depending on their levels and depending on what your learning goals are or the activity or strategy you're using is very important in the success of that strategy or that lesson. So one way that students are grouped is heterogeneously, meaning all different types of students at varying levels, speaking various languages. So this is how MLs spend most of their time and most of their day, is in a heterogeneous group. So they are mixed in with their native English speaking peers, and they're mixed in with other multilingual learners at different levels, with different levels other than the level that they are currently at. So they benefit from being in a heterogeneous group because they're able to experience authentic communication with fluent English speaking peers who are acting as models. And therefore, they're seeing models and examples of academic vocabulary used in context. And then, because of the presence of their native English speakers in their classroom, those teachers are usually adhering more closely to grade level or subject area curriculum and expectations. So our MLs are being exposed to that grade level content and those grade level standards because they're in with their native English speaking peers. However, being heterogeneously grouped with their peers also has some pitfalls for our multilingual learners that I feel like we need to recognize. One, this can be really stressful for our multilingual learners. They can have increased anxiety from this. Their affective filter is heightened, and so they're less likely to be engaged with their peers when they're experiencing this stress or this anxiety. The pace and content of the lessons might be beyond the grasp of many, depending on what their English language proficiency level is. And then they're having to compete with their more proficient native speakers in the classroom. And that can kind of inhibit their attempt to express themselves in English. They're feeling intimidated. They're needing to compete. They feel like their answer might not be as good as their peers, and therefore they're just not going to try. So, a tip for this, look for partners in your classroom who will be patient and supportive of MLs when pairing them with native English speakers. We know that we have some students in our classrooms who are better at working with students than others. They are more patient, they are naturally kinder, and those would be good partners for your MLs when you are pairing them up or grouping them heterogeneously. So just being really intentional about that, and trying to stay away from completely random partners.
And Molly, this makes me think about that thinking and learning framework that I introduced at the very beginning that we use. That first part about building community and how important that is in your classroom. But I mean, it's important for all students in classroom, but especially your multilingual learners, because you want them to feel safe and comfortable in your classroom and not scared.
Absolutely. So, another way that you can group your multilingual learners is homogeneous grouping by language. So, grouping your students based on those who speak the same language. So, if you have multiple Spanish speakers in your room, multiple Korean speakers in your room, French, Swahili, Kinyarwanda, whatever language students are speaking, if there are more than one, you can group them together based on a common native language. So there are lots of benefits to this. Students are feeling more comfortable, tend to participate more actively within those groups of peers who are similar to them. Communication isn't a barrier, so that's kind of a relief. It allows them to work both on the structure of English and academic content side by side when they're paired with students who have similar language needs. It helps them to build comprehension, it deepens their understanding, it builds their confidence, and it gives them a chance to express themselves fully without having language as a barrier for expressing themselves. But homogeneous grouping by language also has some pitfalls. So, if you always group students that way, they might feel segregated or singled out from the rest of the class. If you always have your Spanish speakers sitting by each other and they're always working together while the rest of the class is working together doing something else, it can have them feel different, it can have them feel less than, and that they can shut down because they're feeling that way and not participate because of that. Um, there are opportunities for them to hear and use English with native models in an academic setting. That's limited. So, because they're speaking in their native language, they are not getting that model of English and the academic English vocabulary that should be used within that setting discussing that topic. So, that's kind of limiting when they're only in that homogeneous group based on their language. So there are there are ideal times on when you would use this grouping strategy. One being when they're learning a new concept for the first time. And the example that I like to give is if you are teaching all of your students, your native English speakers and your MLs, the concept of photosynthesis for the first time, having the word photosynthesis translated into Spanish or French or Swahili isn't enough because we're teaching that concept to our native English speakers as well. They know the word photosynthesis, but they don't know what it means yet. So we're learning this content together side by side. And it's also a new vocabulary word for our multilingual learners. So just translating it for them isn't going to be enough. They really need to learn about this concept and have understanding of this as a concept for the first time as well. So giving them materials in their native language, allowing them to discuss it, build their background knowledge in a group or with a partner who speaks that same language before then translating that back into English and expressing their understanding would be a great time to use homogeneous grouping. So learning a concept or a skill for the very first time kind of allows them to deepen that comprehension and understanding in their native language first before then focusing on the English language or the academic vocabulary piece. When they're brainstorming background knowledge on a topic, that would be a great time to group them together. And then when they need to deepen their understanding of a new topic, kind of like I said before. And so a tip for this would be that you as the educator can set parameters such as a timer or time limits and put scaffolds in place for reporting out in English. So, okay, you're in a group, you all can discuss this in Spanish or, Swahili, Somali, discuss it in your own language. But when you report out, I need you to be able to complete this stem in English and give them the opportunity to complete a short sentence stem in English as their share out, but they're discussing all of their ideas and kind of formulating those in their native language. Another grouping strategy is called the buddy system. So this would be when you identify a classmate who would make a good buddy for a new student. So someone who is friendly, patient, a good communicator. This student can make sure that the new student understands what he or she is supposed to do during class activities. It's obviously ideal and helpful if a partner, a peer partner, or a buddy knows that ML student's first language and is fluent in it as well. But that's not necessary because we know sometimes we don't have a student who speaks the same language. The benefits of using the buddy system would be it teaches them classroom procedures and expectations. It allows the students to keep up in class. It's going to begin to build their confidence, provide some language models, and give them opportunities to practice with a trusted peer.
And Molly, I've actually seen the buddy system work in several classrooms that I've been in. I would see two students paired together, and one was either fluent in both languages and would help the student who was less fluent understand what they needed to do. So I've seen how powerful this particular strategy can be for students.
Yes, and especially with our newly arrived students or our newcomers or students who are transferring into us, it is definitely a great tool that teachers should use. However, it also, like the other ways to group students, has some pitfalls or some times where maybe you wouldn't use this. One of the pitfalls is that sometimes this leads to the student with the higher ELP or English language proficiency to become a translator or an interpreter. And this should never happen. It is okay for them to make sure that the student understands what is expected of them or what they're supposed to be doing. Or if the student said, what does this say? A couple words here and there, but never should you as the educator turn to the buddy and say, make sure you explain what you're doing, read this to the student, translate it. It is not that student's job to be a translator or an interpreter, but they can be a buddy and help that student be successful. So really making sure that you are not abusing it for that student and that student doesn't feel that that's their expectation for their partner. And it can be overused. The goal would be that at some point we're removing the buddy. They're acclimated now, they can function in the classroom. They don't need to be buddied and partnered together for the rest of the year. We need to sometimes heterogeneously group them, maybe put them with a different buddy, or a different group, so that they can practice more in English. So that, as all scaffolds, should eventually fade away and not be something that is permanent or overused. But again, when to use it, definitely with your newcomer students, your students who are transferring in that are new to you. And at the beginning of the year, those level 1 students who are very much in the entering phase, that pre-production, that silent period, that is a great time to use the buddy system as well. And so this was kind of how I felt like it could be applied to certain ALM strategies that kind of lean heavily on having a partner or sharing out. So if you're using the ALM strategy Think, Inc, Pair, Share, you could do that homogeneously or heterogeneously grouping, depending on the student's English language proficiency level and the level of content. So if they're learning the concept for the very first time and it is something that is new to them, you would probably homogeneously group them, same language pairing. If this is something that you all have been working on for a long time, you're at the end of the unit, we all have a shared understanding of this topic, heterogeneous grouping with an intentional partner that, like we said before, is more patient, willing to work, good at working with other students. But for both options, as the educator, a scaffold you can put in place is to include a stem for sharing out and the option to share either what they said or what their partner said. So when it comes time for the share portion, kind of taking that stress off of them and saying, if you're not comfortable sharing what your own idea was and your partner had a great idea, you can share what they said as well and use this stem when you're sharing.
And we talked about the use of stems in a couple of the other episodes. So if you didn't see those, you can go back and learn a little more about stems.
Perfect. For the paired verbal fluency strategy, that would be best homogeneously grouped, allowing students to converse in their L1 or their native language, their first language, since it is a time discussion. So to fill a minute of time in English when you are not comfortable in that language yet or don't have enough proficiency to fill that time yet might be uncomfortable if you're heterogeneously grouped with someone who doesn't speak your language. But homogeneously grouped, you can fill that time, they can understand you, and they can share back. So for that strategy to be successful, students would need to be homogeneously grouped if possible. If you were going to do the ordered sharing strategy, I would allow students to practice with a homogeneous partner, a language partner first, before sharing out with the whole group, and provide sentence stems for when they do the whole group share out. So giving them that practice piece with a peer that they feel safe with, where they can share their idea in their native language first before having to share out in English, would make that strategy most successful. For a jigsaw activity, that would be best if they're homogeneously grouped for the expert groups. So you all are reading Article 1, you all speak Swahili, and you're going to read Article 1 and become experts at that and decide how you're going to then go back to your heterogeneous group for the mixed group and share what you all decided. So homogeneous for the expert groups, and then they can be mixed groups when they come back and kind of share their expertise. For cafe conversation, homogeneous grouping where at least one member has a higher ELP in writing. So looking at your students' English language proficiency levels, if you watched episode 1, looking at their writing score, a student who has a higher proficiency in writing should be a member of that group so that as they're having these discussions in their native language, they're able to produce something in English for the cafe conversation piece. And then the last one, save the last word for me, that would be best done in a homogeneous group where students are allowed to discuss and converse in their first language. Because for that one, partners B and C are having a discussion based on what A has shared. So making sure that they're able to talk in depth about the topics. Students might be most comfortable doing that in their L1, and it's usually after one of the first times they've read something. So they're kind of grappling with new content in a new topic. So those are just some ideas. There are way more ALM strategies out there that would benefit from intentional grouping. These were just some common ones where grouping was a main piece.
And I like that you included cafe conversation and the suggestion for grouping there. But also, that's a particular strategy that students can use images or graphics or visuals as well. So if they're not as comfortable with the writing or the words, they can still contribute to that strategy through images.
Yes. And then I just wanted to include or kind of talk about 3 strategies for successful collaboration across the board, no matter what type of ALM strategy you're using when you're wanting students to collaborate. These are kind of 3 successful strategies that you can use to make sure that good collaboration and true collaboration is happening in your classroom. This is from the book Small Moves, Big Gains by Nancy Motley. I attended a conference on this last year, and it was just filled with amazing strategies. These are just 3, but it was a wonderful conference. The book is very small, and it talks about small moves teachers can make in their classroom, tiny shifts, tiny tweaks that will have big gains when it comes to student participation and student learning. So we're going to talk about appointed roles, prep the speaker, and anyone's idea. The first one is appointed roles. So this is just giving students a role for how and when they will participate when they're collaborating with others. So you see on the left there, this is kind of how to implement the better habit and then why that move is significant in your classroom. So for appointed roles, you think of how students collaborate in your class and you give them specific labels that correspond. So if you know that you're going to want to have partners talk to each other, then you're going to want to make sure that there is a student A and a student B. If you know that there's going to be small groups, then you want to make sure that those groups are numbered 1 through 6. And if there are 5 members of that group, then you're going to want to make sure that the members have their own number. So there's a member 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So if I have 6 groups of 6 students, then they would be numbered, and then each group of 6, if I also want to have them share as a partner, they would be an A or a B. So sometimes you'd hand a student an index card that says you're group 1, member 2, partner A, and they just kind of have it on their desk. So then you use those assigned roles to tell students who will speak first. So when they're doing thinking pair share, they're with their partner. I want partner B to share first. If they're in their group 1 through 6, you would say, today, number 3 is going to share first. So you're always alternating who's going to speak first using those same labels. And you can always do it at random. You can roll a digital dice, and it's like, oh, number 6 is going to be the one that shares. If you're running out of time and you were going to have all groups share, but now you only want one group to share, your groups are numbered. So you could say, I want group number 2 to share out. So it's really just giving students a role for how and when they'll participate when they're collaborating with others, and making sure that you are always alternating who is going to speak and who's going to share to ensure participation. So that move is significant, just labeling your groups and group members and giving an A and a B, because it's going to ensure more equitable participation. Everyone is participating. It minimizes that ability for those students to fly under the radar, like, oh, I know I got a good speaker in my group, so I'm just going to sit back here and kind of let them do the talking. Everyone's idea is valued. It increases their confidence over time. So once you put this in place in your classroom and that kind of becomes your routine and the expectation, students are going to become more confident when participating in group work, and they're going to be more accountable. So it increases that accountability piece. So that is appointed roles.
And I'm going to make a connection here. When we talk
Yes.
about academic dialogue with ALM, we talk about the academic dialogue being structured and intentional. And this is a great example of how to make it more structured. When we do training with teachers and with classrooms, we encourage teachers to use the strategy of clock partners or phone favorites to identify particular students to talk to. We do strategies where we have a partner A and a partner B.
Yeah.
And to your point, it's so that everybody's voices are heard at some point. And we've talked about how important it is for our multilingual learners, that speaking and listening piece. And this just elevates that for them and provides some accountability. Because I've been in classrooms where a lot of times it's easy for our multilingual learners to just kind of fly under the radar, as you say there, and just not really share or talk. But this gives them a role and an accountability piece to make sure they're part of the classroom and the learning and their voices are heard.
And as the teacher, you still have the control. So if you know that you have a student who just arrived yesterday to the United States and your classroom, and they are group 2 and they're member 2, you know that as the teacher. So when you randomly decide who is sharing out, you can be sure to not call on member 2 from group 2 to share, but they don't know that. So they're still participating, they're still engaged, they're making sure that they're ready with something to say. But if you know they're probably not comfortable sharing out yet, you still have the control and the knowledge of who's in what group and who's partner A and B and 1 through 6, and you can kind of navigate that without the students knowing that you're doing that.
And I think that's kind of a good transition to the second one.
Yes, yes. So prep the speaker is another great, easy to implement strategy where groups determine their best answer and the speaker can practice what they're going to say before they share it with the whole class. So let's say that you did a digital dice and you rolled it and it said that group member 3 was going to be the one who shares. And group member 3 is your newcomer student that maybe isn't comfortable sharing out as the whole class. So what you do is you give the group a short amount of time to prep the speaker. So you say, I'm going to give you 1 minute. Everyone in your group is going to prep speaker 3 and tell them exactly what they're going to share out with the whole group. They can write it down, they can read from it, and then you ask each speaker to share out whatever that group's best answer was. So that provides time to review their ideas or focus on them for the first time. Maybe you had a group that was off topic and talking about what they did over the weekend, and now they need to share out. It gives them a minute to come up with something to share really quick. It's oral rehearsal time for the speaker, so that's especially beneficial for our MLs. It's giving them that oral speaking practice so that they are able to share, even if they're a newly arrived student. It's shifting that responsibility back to everyone in the group. So, yes, group member 3 is sharing out, but you all need to prepare them because they're speaking for the group. And then that kind of just creates that spirit of true, authentic collaboration.
I like that.
And then the last one is anyone's idea. I kind of mentioned this earlier with the thinking pair share strategy and how to group students. But this is just when the teacher encourages students who have been called upon to either share their own idea or any idea they heard from someone else. So it takes the pressure off of them and what their answer and their response was going to be. And it allows them to share. If you heard a really good idea when you were discussing with your partner or when you were in a small group, I'm going to allow you to share either yours or anyone else's. So yeah, it gives them options. They can share their idea, another person's idea, or they could just share a comment or something they thought. And so that's a significant move, a small move that you can do anytime you pose a question to the class. And it's significant because it gives options on what students can share, which lowers the pressure. The speaker has more control over what to share. There isn't just one correct answer. They have control over what they're choosing to share. It's going to increase those responses from your anxious students, who we know are not just our MLs, but those students who are anxious when it comes to sharing in front of the class. And students feel like reporters instead of experts. Like, I'm just sharing out what I heard. It might be right, it might be wrong, but you just asked me to share what I heard. So here's what I heard. And it takes that pressure of correct and incorrect kind of off of the student. And these three strategies that I just shared, the appointed roles, the prep the speaker, and anyone's idea, they're not separate strategies that are used in isolation or as silos. They can build on each other, and you can pose one question to your class where you are using appointed roles, then they're prepping the speaker, and then when they share out, they can share their idea or anyone in the group's idea. So they kind of build on each other and work together.
Those are all three great ideas for helping our multilingual learners, especially feel more comfortable in our classrooms. But again, not just for those students, but for any students.
So these are just some additional considerations when thinking about grouping students and having our multilingual learners work in collaborative settings. Culture is something to take into consideration. So some students are from collectivist cultures, some students are from individualist cultures. And that chart there on the right is taken from a text, and it shows and it ranks different countries and whether they are a more individualist culture or collectivist. So I know it's kind of small, but the number one individualist culture is the United States. We like to work individually, we're for ourselves, we want to get it done ourselves, we trust ourselves and not really other people to do the work for us. So we are very much an individualist culture. And we see that in our classrooms, which is why we're always being told, more student talk, more collaboration. The United States has just proven to be an individualist culture. So it's harder to get those students to collaborate. But then if you look at the very end of the list, Guatemala, or your students from Guatemala, that is a very collectivist culture. So actually asking them to do something individually is very difficult from them because they come from a place where it is very common to do everything together and to work together on all things. So I just thought that was interesting. You can Google that chart. There's different versions of it. But just kind of so you know what their background is and if it's going to be difficult to get them to collaborate or if it's going to be more difficult to get them to work independently. And then those cultures in between.
That's really interesting. I was not familiar with that chart, did not know about that. I'm very interested to learn more, and I can see how that would be really helpful for a teacher to be aware of that within their classrooms.
And you can find your students' birth country in the EL tab in Infinite Campus. So if you haven't watched session 1, you can go back and it will show you where to find that so that you know what country your student was born in and came from, and they might possess these tendencies. Also with cultural norms around interacting with peers, different cultures have different norms on collaboration and what that looks like. So all students need to be taught what collaboration should look like in your classroom. Even if they're native English speakers from the US, collaboration in this classroom will look like this, and really being explicit with teaching that because different cultures have different norms around how you interact with peers. And then another piece to really consider students with the same language or the same racial background, while you might group them together because of this, they may come from different groups within that have a history of conflict. So just being really cognizant of just because you think two students should work really well together because of what you're seeing on paper or in the EL tab and Infinite Campus, there might be some conflict between the groups in which they came from. And so just to be really aware and open and understanding if they come with those things to maybe reconsider the grouping and to kind of push you to learn more about that.
Excellent considerations.
And then the other consideration for student grouping that I did mention again in session 1 and earlier in the session 2, the silent period. So your students who are in that entering stage, that level 1 pre-production, they're not producing English yet. So our newly arrived students often go through what is referred to as the silent period. They're listening to language. They're hearing what's going on around them. They're observing, but they are not speaking or writing or producing any type of language yet. And so tips would just be patient. This is very common in any stage of, if we were to go to another country and learn another language, we would go through the silent period with second language acquisition. This is everyone's first stage. then again, going back to that chart from session one, so asking yes or no questions, allowing students to nod, do a thumbs up, do a thumbs down. They're absorbing the language, so they might be able to respond in those ways. And giving those students opportunities for small successes with speaking, with speaking with an individual before you're asking them to speak in larger groups. And I think we kind of hit on that with just being intentional about grouping, but then just really, really giving them the opportunity to succeed in small ways before expecting them to produce English in a big way.
Molly, what a great wealth of knowledge you've shared with us today around grouping students. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and what you know about our multilingual learners, how we can make some of those small shifts to help them be more successful in our classrooms.
Yeah,
And
you're welcome.
yeah, so again, here are additional resources that you can explore. We've included these in our previous episodes, so these are the same, as well as those articles that I had talked about previously. Again, you can find the slide deck in the notes section, and you can access those there. Finally, here is our contact information. If you have questions or want to know more, you can contact myself or Molly, and we're happy to try to answer some questions or get you in touch with somebody who can. Thank you for being a part of this series. We hope that it's been helpful to you as you think about how to better help the multilingual learners and really any learners in your classroom. So many of these strategies are good for all students. So good luck to you. Thank you and best of luck.